Hi, welcome to the latest episode of History You Didn't Know But Should. I'm Ray.
And I'm Chris.
And today we're starting a brand new 6-part series on the Wives of Henry VIII. Today we're going to be looking at Katherine of Aragon. And Chris, what a fascinating group of women these are. Each one in their own way, even apart from Henry VIII. Each of these women, I think, can stand by themselves in the fact they're very fascinating individuals.
Yeah, there's so much history with each one, and I'll offer just a concession or a confession, I guess is what it was. I just recently went and saw the Broadway show Six, which talks about the six wives of Henry VIII. And Ray, it was during the middle of that presentation of that show in which I said, "Oh no, I have been teaching history wrong for all my life," because I would always talk about the first three in a world history class. I would spend a lot of time on Henry VIII. We talk about, Jane Seymour, Katherine of Aragon, Anne Boleyn, because that's who everybody knows. But then I thought, I have not shared the beautiful and fascinating history of these other three wives of Henry. More importantly, I haven't talked about them apart from Henry and their legacy and the importance of studying about them instead of saying, well, there was his first wife, or he had six wives and he killed some and he, beheaded some, whatever it might be. So Ray, I'm really excited about this series because it was one of those aha moments, I guess, in which I was like, we really, if there's ever an episode or a series we can do that truly is history you didn't know but should, I think it's these ex-wives of Henry VIII, especially as we get to maybe some of the lesser known ones.
Yeah, and I'm worse than you. I mean, I've never taught world history in my entire career. Most of what I teach is American history and American government, but I have taught one or two sections of Western civilization. But in my American history class, of course, you do briefly speed bump over the Protestant Reformation and of course, Henry VIII separating the Church of England from the Catholic Church. And of course, we're going to talk about Katherine of Aragon today, and she was very much involved in that. That I've dealt with, but I've really not dealt with any of the wives beyond, Katherine of Aragon and Boleyn as it relates to the divorce there. But other than that, I haven't talked about any of my class. But I do have the excuse: it's American history. I'm not supposed to.
And I think we have to kind of start off by understanding that, back in the day, when we're talking about this time period, the 1500s, 16th century, marriages were not really about love, but more about power and alliances. And this is especially true with, Catherine's mom and dad. She, first of all, is a Spaniard. She's from Spain, and she is the daughter of Queen Isabella of Castile and King Ferdinand of Aragon. Mm-hmm. And honestly, you say, okay, so what? Big deal. Why do you even mention them? Well, go back to that world history aspect. Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand get married to unite Spain. I mean, that was the whole purpose of their marriage. And now you start seeing, okay, King Ferdinand, who has united Spain, you have King Henry over in England, who now starts to say, wait a second, okay, if I can find a way to unite my kingdom with King Ferdinand's kingdom, then that's going to be helpful for England, who is kind of at war or having battles with France during this time. So, we've got to understand that the story of Katherine of Aragon and King Henry by looking at the fact that, was there love there? Very debatable, but I think the answer is, yeah, there was some love that was there for a short period of time. But the ultimate reason that marriages happen in this time period was basically because of what's in it for me, what's in it for my kingdom, what's in it for my country, how will it be useful to me. And I think that's where Catherine and King Henry come together.
Now, real quick, the American historian in me's got to ask. I think I know the answer, but you're more into the world history than I am. Ferdinand the First, Isabella the First, aren't these? I know it's the right time frame. Aren't these the people who sent Christopher Columbus and ultimately bumped into the Americas?
Yeah, and yeah, on the way to China, found America,
Yeah.
and so, but it is, and they were, once again, they were the ones who give Columbus the chance after Columbus has been rejected multiple times because everybody says the guy's an idiot, but these guys give him a chance. Why? Because they do it in the theme of God, glory, and gold, the three G's of why they're going to go out and do these things. And so Isabella and Ferdinand once again send Columbus out there seeking God, seeking glory, but also for money. Same thing here, right? Because Catherine and her family are staunch Catholics.
Yeah.
I mean, they're very, very adamant. That's going to play a role in Catherine and Henry's relationship during this time as well. So you're absolutely right. The relationship with Ferdinand and Isabella in world history changes world history forever. But then the relationship between Catherine of Aragon, and King Henry VIII will transform English religion and politics forever. And going into you being the American history centerpiece there of studying, it will change American politics and religion as well. Because all of that makes its way over here. If you start thinking about the Protestants and the Pilgrims and the Puritans, it all comes back together with this religious war that we'll have in America with the Church of England.
Yeah. Now, when I think about Katherine of Aragon, and I've done a little reading on her, she's not your typical woman for the late 15th, early 16th century. This is a woman who, because of who her parents were in the position they held, she is really born, we would say today, with privilege, right? I mean, she's getting an education that most women, not just most, the vast majority of women in the 15th and early 16th centuries couldn't even dream of. And that's because of who her parents were.
Yeah, I mean, she was well educated, but not only did she have the education, but she understood politics. And she understood this. I want to make sure I say this right, so help me if I don't say it right. She understood her place in society. She understood her role, and her role was, to unite with someone and to carry that kingdom-driven purpose of God, gold, and glory. And I think that's because she had all of this expertise, but she also loved to hunt. She loved the outdoors because they had money. They had all of the things that you just mentioned. The very luxurious lifestyle. And I honestly think that's what brings Henry to be fascinated with Catherine. And they had a love for some of the same things. And, Henry's going to marry Catherine because he wants to, because they have common interest, but also that common interest is, going to rule. It is interesting, by the way, that Catherine is 6 years older than Henry. I think at the time when they got married, Catherine's 23 and King Henry is 17. But something else happens long before even Henry and Catherine get married.
Yeah, she was originally married to Henry's older brother, Prince Arthur, in 1501, and he dies in 1502. Get this, she was a widow at 16 years of age. So her life, though she does have this very impressive upbringing and education, she's bilingual, not just bilingual, she can speak multiple languages, but she's got this very impressive background. But then at the age of 16, she is a widow. And to come to what you were talking about these marriages were rarely to never really due to quote unquote love. Arthur's death started a feud, a controversy between Spain, which is, of course, Isabella and Ferdinand and Catherine, and England, which is, of course, Arthur the First and ultimately Henry the Eighth. It's going to start a controversy over her dowry.
Yeah, and it was very expensive.
Yeah.
Arranged, it was an arranged marriage, as we have talked about. That I remember reading something that Prince Arthur actually wrote to King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella. He wrote to him and said, "I can hardly wait to behold the face of my lovely bride." He'd never seen her before, and it was also interesting that they both knew Latin. There's that privileged upbringing, but that they spoke Latin in different, I guess dialect is the word back then, so that they couldn't even really communicate with each other. It's kind of like you really had a Spaniard who spoke Spanish marrying an Englishman who spoke English. And so you have this relationship of marriage with Arthur, though it's a short period of time, but they didn't know each other through speaking, but they also had never really seen each other. But Prince Arthur did promise that he would be a true loving husband, and I think he was for a year, and then he dies.
For the year, he didn't have too much time to mess it up.
Right.
He only had a year, maybe a little less than that. So she marries Henry VIII in 1509, and just a few years into their marriage, she ends up taking on a major role in England as Henry VIII goes to France for a few years. I think he's there 2 or 3 years. And Catherine's going to sort of serve in his place as regent there in England while Henry's gone. So you can see the value if you're looking at her from the standpoint of Henry. If you're looking at her from the standpoint of the English, you can certainly see the value of having someone like her. It helps, I guess, to some degree, calm relations between England and Spain, but it also, they get a well-educated, very capable young lady who can step in when Henry has to be away, and they don't have to turn it to keys to the kingdom, so to speak, over to someone else whom they may not trust that much.
So I think it's very important at this point in the story for everyone to understand that they were a very happy couple. King Henry took on his brother's wife, which had some biblical roots in that, right? I mean, very religious people, that if your brother's widow, you were responsible in taking care of your brother's widow. And so he did that, and he did that willingly, and he did that lovingly. It wasn't begrudging. So, at the very beginning, they are a very happy couple where they two trust each other. I mean, King Henry actually told Katherine of Aragon, "I trust you with everything. I trust you." And to the point where he left to go fight, as you mentioned, and she's put in charge, which once again, kind of unheard of. And so everything is going well. They're hunting together, they're enjoying life together. Everything is wonderful, except in the back of Henry's mind, he's got this thing that is weighing on him. And Ray, that is this idea of dynasty. And the fact that, English kings, while they were so focused on conquering kingdoms, they wanted their name to last forever. There's that glory aspect, if you will. And so in the back of King Henry's mind, he is always focusing on having a male heir. That is a critical issue. He's got to have a son to carry the lineage on down so that the son could be king. And that will become the ultimate issue that basically destroys what was at the beginning a beautiful love story. It turns it apart.
Yeah, she's going to bear 6 children to Henry, but only one of those children, and I don't know off the top of my head, you probably do, how many of them are boys, but only one of them is going to survive to adulthood, and that's Mary Tudor, who of course will be king. You've got Henry VIII. When he dies, Edward VI, and then, well, there's someone in between there very briefly, like a few days, and then there's Mary Tudor. So she's the only heir he gets from this particular marriage who survives to adulthood is a girl. And of course, like you said, he wanted a boy. He wanted a boy to take the throne from him upon his death. And it's this situation, as you mentioned, that causes him to take some steps that, I've got to think not just simply probably angered Catherine, but had to make her extremely uncomfortable from some of the things that he starts accusing or starts saying about their marriage and all that kind of thing when he goes to, in 1527, Pope Clement VII. And you have to understand at this particular point in time, why would he go to the Pope to get a divorce? Why not just go down to the quote unquote courthouse and file some paperwork like people do today and get a divorce? Well, remember, the king is under the control at this particular point, control may be the wrong word, of the Roman Catholic Church. And by the way, I believe that Catherine is related to Charles V, who's the king of the Holy Roman Empire. Am I correct?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So, when he goes to the Pope, it's Pope Clement VII, and he's asking for a divorce. That is a really big deal. And he goes there and he basically says that their marriage, the marriage between Henry VIII and Katherine of Aragon, was not legitimate because she was married to Arthur, his brother, first.
Yeah, and so, and there's a couple of things that I think just go with this. You start to see this really start to unravel, and King Henry, after the birth of Mary, actually said, "Hey, we're both young. It's a daughter this time. By the grace of God, the sons are going to come." He's thinking everything's going to be okay. And they have these, children together that unfortunately lose their lives. But he's still optimistic. But then there's this thing called age. Age starts to go. They get older, and, she's just not having any sons, and he's becoming restless, and he is increasingly desperate for a son. And that's when Anne Boleyn enters into the picture. French educated. She is Catherine's lady in waiting, which is basically she takes care of all things of Catherine. She's living in the palace. She's around Catherine just about all of the time. And when Anne Boleyn comes in, Catherine's days are basically going to be numbered, because Anne is glamorous and she is young and she captivates the king. We'll talk about her later on. But it is important to note that Henry was not faithful to Katherine of Aragon. Really, he's not faithful to anybody, but he's not faithful to Katherine of Aragon. He's known to have many mistresses, and Catherine knew this, and she tolerated. And I can only imagine the hurt and the frustration that she had, that he's sleeping around with her. He's doing all of these things, and she is trying her best to be that partner that he wanted and that she wanted. And then here's talk, as you mentioned, of divorce. And then, she's a staunch Catholic, he's a staunch Catholic, and, divorce is not an option. And so King Henry starts looking for another way out. And that's where, he does really start to publicly now hurt Katherine of Aragon. He's been privately hurting her by sleeping around and doing all of these things, being abusive to her. But now what he says is, hey, Catherine, when she was married to my brother Arthur, they consummated the marriage. And because they consummated the marriage, here's my problem, guys. The problem is that God's mad at me. God is really mad with me because I married his brother's widow. I should have just taken care of her. I shouldn't have been with her. I shouldn't have got married. And so now God's mad at me. And because God's mad at me, he's denying me from having a son. And so Catherine's got to go, because that's what the Bible says. And I am a Bible believing Catholic. And, Leviticus says blah, blah, blah. And I follow the Bible. Forget that other thing about, sleeping around with all these women, but I'm following the Bible. And so Catherine's got to go because God's mad. So we got to find a way to do it. And it isn't like they just go to the courthouse. I mean, he had to go to court.
Well, that, yeah.
And they questioned her sexual history in public with Arthur. And I mean, she's being cross-examined by her husband.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, imagine how embarrassing and how terrible it could have been. And I guess Catherine could have gone quietly, but she doesn't, because she fights for her marriage.
Yeah, and going back to the Pope real quick, and then circling back around to Catherine, the Pope isn't interested in this initially. He's not interested in this at all. I mean, period. Not just simply for the religious reasons. And I sort of had to giggle when you talked about Henry VIII worrying about what the Bible said. It's sort of like, well, I'm sure the Bible's got something against beheading one of your wives, but just put that aside for a second. He's also concerned not just simply for those theological reasons, but I look back at my notes. Charles V, Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, is the nephew of Katherine of Aragon. So the Pope is not wanting to make him mad by granting the divorce, because if he grants the divorce of Henry from Catherine, that's going to make Catherine mad, which in turn is going to make Charles V angry. So there's a lot, not just simply religious considerations, theological considerations. There's also those considerations of politics, those considerations of those international politics. And you talk about how Henry was abusive to Catherine. She refused to accept the divorce. And so what does he do? He separates her from her daughter, Mary, and doesn't allow her to see her until she's willing to accept the divorce, which she never does.
And that's the part right there, is that he cruelly denies contact with the daughter that Catherine gave birth to. And I can't, I mean, you just sit there and think about the story, that here is this, what at the beginning seemed like this beautiful relationship that was forming and all of these great plans. And because Catherine doesn't give him what he wants, he, for some reason, thinks that it's Catherine. Our story, as we go through the next few episodes, might lead us to think that maybe she's not the problem.
Right.
But he is the king and he's got to look good. And so if something comes at you, hey, why can't you have a son? It's her fault. But Ray, can you imagine just cruelly denying contact with something that she gave birth to the point that, I mean, 3 years after the marriage is annulled, and she dies, and she dies at the age of 50.
Mm-hmm.
And
well, go ahead. Sorry.
No, you go ahead.
Well, I mean, not only that, he pulls Mary away from Catherine, which he must have known that Mary loved her daughter. I mean, that should go without saying, but he must have known that, and he must have known this was going to have an effect on Catherine. So he's doing it for that sole reason. This is not just some random act. He's pulling Mary away, or keeping Mary away from Catherine because of that. And not only that, Catherine's looking at this through the angle, and I'm assuming Mary may have as well, through the angle of politics, because at this point, since Mary's the only one who's made it to adulthood, who's ultimately survives to adulthood, Mary is whether he likes it or not, she's in line to the throne. Whether Henry likes that idea or not, it's his daughter Mary who's in line from the throne. Then after he marries, of course, I think we overlook the fact that in order to get the divorce, in order to get the marriage canceled with Katherine of Aragon, he sets himself up as the head of the English church, the Church of England, and he removes the church from the Roman Catholic Church under the authority of the Roman Catholic Church. He takes it out. And so he sort of sets up, I guess you have to say, his own church there in England, placing himself at the head. So of course he can grant himself a divorce and all that. Who's going to tell him no at this point? Not anybody who values their head. So in a way, he puts England into the Protestant Reformation, but whereas other places were going into the Protestant Reformation for theological reasons. Henry puts the nation into the Protestant Reformation for purely selfish reasons. And that is, he wanted a son, heir. He wanted to be married to Anne Boleyn. That's what he wanted to do. So he's willing to just do everything, push everything around in order to get his way. And of course, Boleyn is going to give birth to a daughter who we know is Elizabeth. And what does that do to Mary? It turns Mary illegitimate, because her mother, Katherine of Aragon, is no longer married to Henry VIII.
Okay.
So Mary, once Anne Boleyn marries Henry VIII, and they have a daughter, Elizabeth I, that fast, Mary is now illegitimate and no longer an heir to the throne. But of course, she's going to end up on the throne through a twisted series of circumstances.
And all the while, you're kicked out of the palace,
Mm-hmm.
you're kicked out of your former husband's heart, you're kicked out of your daughter's life. He's chosen a younger thing, if you will, a younger girl, to give him what he needs. And I'll close my part with this. There's a verse from that Broadway show of Katherine of Aragon singing, and these are her words, quote, "You've got me down on my knees. Please tell me what you think I've done wrong. I've been humble, been loyal. I've tried to swallow my pride all along. If you can just explain a single thing I've done to cause you pain, I'll go. No, you've got nothing to say, then I'm not going away." And she remains, and she stays there. But here's the thing, I guess, the lasting legacy for me with Katherine. And remember, Ray, I think we started the podcast because we really want these next few episodes to focus on the lives of the women and less so on the life of King Henry VIII. And so the lasting legacy for me of Katherine is this: she loved Henry until the very end. Somehow, some way, she never stopped loving this man who did all of these cruel and horrible things to her, and she never stopped loving him. Her last letter that she read to him, or sent to him, read this. She said, "Mine eyes desire you above all things. Signed, Katherine the Queen." This was after everything. And she still was devoted to the one who did her so wrong. If that's not a definition of what love is, I don't know what it is. But I am thankful that we have the opportunity to talk about the legacy of Katherine and the lessons of Katherine that remind us of what it means to experience some really bad things in life and how to put your next foot forward.
And going right along with that, and that you sort of alluded to it, Katherine never stopped seeing herself as queen. And interestingly enough, to speak of her toughness, her strength, when it was requested that she give her crown to Anne Boleyn, she refused. She said, "No, thank you. I'm the Queen of England. I'm going to keep this crown." And of course, she's going to die in 1536, just 3 years after the marriage of Henry VIII with Anne Boleyn. I'm going to have to pronounce her name correctly before the next episode, Chris. Anyway, great first episodes, making me get more and more looking forward to learning more and more about these women. 1 down, 5 to go. So hope our listeners enjoy this series of podcasts on the Wives of Henry VIII. Please share this episode with your family and friends. Like us on Spotify, and also find us on Facebook. And until next time, I'm Ray.
I'm Chris.
Talk to you later.